U.S. National Livermore Laboratory has released nearly 500 videos online, capturing American nuclear tests conducted between 1945 and 1962. These films have been archived for over half a century. There are over 10,000 recordings in total. One of the most spectacular tests was the detonation of a 30-kiloton atomic bomb on the outskirts of a small American town, specifically constructed in Nevada for this purpose. The town was populated with supermarket mannequins, and they were provided with well-equipped homes, functioning televisions, and modern vehicles. The store shelves were stocked with an abundance of goods. The operation's objective was to determine the chances of survival after a nuclear strike, which turned out to be slim. All residential buildings were reduced to tiny fragments, while sturdy metal structures collapsed like a house of cards. The mannequins sustained fatal injuries. Strangely enough, the most resilient objects were beer cans. They survived even when positioned 300 meters from the blast's epicenter. Moreover, the beer remained drinkable. Thus, humanity discovered what it would be drinking in the event of a nuclear apocalypse. But will any of us survive a nuclear collision? And if not, who will take our place on Earth? Who will become the dominant species? Is a war involving nuclear weapons even possible? Military analysts possess indirect evidence suggesting that the United States is preparing to initiate a nuclear conflict in the near future, in an unexpected location. American military engineers are actively working on developing low-yield nuclear munitions, which the Pentagon hopes to employ without triggering a large-scale nuclear war. Tests have already been conducted on the new B-6112 bombs. The first B-61 appeared in the 1960s and has since been considered the primary nuclear weapon of the U.S. strategic forces. The current bomb is the 12th modification. According to various estimates, the arsenals of the United States contain up to 1,500 ready-to-use charges. But how is this possible, you may ask, given the international treaties prohibiting testing, proliferation, and so on? In reality, the situation is more complex. As history shows, any agreement, international treaty, or law can be circumvented. The first controlled nuclear chain reaction was successfully achieved in December 1942 by a team of physicists led by Enrico Fermi at the University of Chicago. Fermi oversaw the process from a balcony, while 44 members of the scientific group were present. Another individual, positioned below, carried out Fermi's commands and operated a special lever. 3 team members stood guard near the reactor, ready to drop neutralizers to halt the reaction if anything went wrong. After 28 minutes of experimentation, the entire team celebrated their victory. The consequences of this event were not long in coming. In August 1945, the United States dropped 2 atomic bombs on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, marking the beginning of humanity's nuclear era. Everyone knows about the first and only known case of nuclear weapons being used in combat, the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. However, few realize that the bombs dropped on these cities, despite their devastating effects, were perhaps the least harmful of all those created by humanity. During subsequent tests, both the Soviet Union and the United States detonated bombs that were thousands of times more powerful. Take a look for yourself. Experts estimate the combined explosive power of the 2 nuclear bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki to be 39 kilotons, an equivalent to TNT. These bombs almost completely destroyed the cities. On March 27, 1954, a bomb named Castle Romeo exploded with a yield of 11 megatons. This is hundreds of times greater than what was seen in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. On October 30, 1961, at the Sukhoi Nos nuclear test site on Novaya Zemlya, the Soviet Tsar Bomba detonated. The recorded explosive power was 58 megatons. The Tsar Bomba is recognized as the most powerful explosive device in human history. The explosion of the Tsar Bomba shocked civilians. The Soviet Union demonstrated its potential in creating an arsenal of unlimited nuclear power. At that time, the United States possessed a bomb with a maximum yield of 30 megatons. Subsequently, Soviet and American negotiators began to consider refraining from such a reckless arms race, as it was extremely dangerous. In 1963, the parties signed the treaty banning nuclear weapon tests in the atmosphere, in outer space, and underwater in Moscow. However, this did not mean that nuclear testing ceased. It merely shifted underground and into secret laboratories. All clandestine nuclear explosions and tests can now only be conducted underground in specially equipped mines. In underground bunkers, nuclear physicists studied materials that provided protection against radiation. Meanwhile, military and medical personnel conducted experiments on unsuspecting individuals. One of the experiments involved injecting plutonium into a human's vein and observing the changes in their condition. It was decided to use terminally ill patients for this purpose. For the first stage, 18 test subjects were selected. One of them turned out to be an American citizen named Albert Stevens, a simple painter from California. Albert felt a pain in his stomach one day and went for an examination at the hospital, where he received the devastating diagnosis of stomach cancer. According to the doctor's prognosis, the patient had only about a year left to live. It was these hopeless patients that the nuclear researchers were seeking for their secret experiment. They offered Albert the opportunity to participate in testing a new treatment method. To begin, under the guise of a regular vitamin serum, they administered the experimental injection with microdoses of plutonium. Surprisingly, the effect of plutonium on Stevens' body was not as noticeable as previously assumed. It was only after 10 years that the first signs of bone degeneration appeared, followed by internal organ damage later on. Living for 10 years instead of the promised year, Albert was grateful for the extra time. In order to extend his life further, he agreed to undergo an operation to remove part of the affected organs. It was then that it became clear that Albert did not have cancer at all. What the doctor had mistaken for a tumor was merely a stomach ulcer. After the operation, Albert Stevens lived for another 10 years and passed away at the age of 79 due to heart failure, having fought a battle with cancer that never truly existed. He never found out that he was part of a secret program testing radioactive elements on humans. In modern times, everything related to the use of nuclear weapons is often considered a thing of fantasy. Everyone knows they exist, yet everyone understands that no one will resort to using them in the event of a global conflict. But is this truly the case? Trump and his team are preparing the groundwork for the United States to withdraw from the nuclear testing moratorium. This is linked to the decision made in the U.S. to develop and adopt weapons with extremely small calibers. 3 years ago, the U.S. National Nuclear Security Administration posted a message on their website announcing the beginning of the modernization of nuclear arsenals. Allegedly, this is necessary to extend the operational lifespan of these systems by at least 20 years. One of the planned subsections mentions the need to modernize the B-61 bombs. Thus, B-61-12 is the 12th version of the B-61 bomb and is a glide bomb. In other words, if you attach it to a tactical aircraft, it can drop the bomb outside the range of air defense systems, and it will glide for approximately 50 to 100 kilometers before hitting its target. Experts have suspected that this bomb was not chosen at random. After the Cold War, according to various estimates, between 200 and 500 American B-61 bombs remained on European territory. This is an impressive arsenal. Additionally, this is a bomb with variable yield. In other words, the weapon can be equipped with thermonuclear warheads of varying strengths. If we pay attention to how the bomb was modernized, there will be no further questions. To turn B-61-12 into a glide bomb, a special control module for the bomb during flight is added, as well as a positioning module that allows the bomb to accurately reach the target. This gives us a tactical nuclear weapon with low yield. In other words, it is enough to deliver the accompanying removable equipment to Europe, not the B-61 bomb itself, and it will become a B-61-12. Experts are also concerned about the new U.S. nuclear doctrine. It seems that the Americans are seriously considering using low-yield nuclear weapons in local conflicts. They have justified this by saying that a small nuclear charge will cause relatively minor damage and will not appear to be a global nuclear catastrophe, as was the case with Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This will be even 4 times less if we are talking about a 5-kiloton charge. And, according to analysts, the first such war could occur in the coming years. It seems like madness, doesn't it? But I recently came across a story that made me pause and reflect. In Hiroshima and Nagasaki, despite the immense loss of life, there were survivors. They are known as hibakusha in modern Japan. Even more remarkably, there were those who survived both bombings. These individuals are called Ningen hibakusha. The day after the atomic bombing of Hiroshima, hundreds of wounded and affected individuals had to leave the devastated city. Some chose Nagasaki as their final destination, only to find themselves in another nuclear apocalypse on August 9th. Today, we know of 165 such unfortunate souls. The most famous among them is Tsutomu Yamaguchi, who passed away on January 4, 2010, in Nagasaki at the age of 93. Interestingly, he is the only person whose presence in both Nagasaki and Hiroshima during the atomic bombings has been officially confirmed. In Hiroshima, he was just 3 kilometers away from the epicenter of the blast. In Nagasaki, he was even closer, at a distance of only 1 kilometer. Yet, there were those who survived being just 300 meters from the epicenter. Take Akiko Tokakura, for example, who also lived to a ripe old age. Let us remember that the bomb dropped on Hiroshima had a yield of 18 kilotons, while the one on Nagasaki was even more powerful at 21 kilotons. What if the Pentagon truly believed that bombs with yields of 5 and 10 kilotons would have less devastating consequences? And what if they are prepared to use these charges? Does this thought not send a shiver down your spine as well? In 1946, the Americans conducted their first large-scale nuclear tests in the Pacific Ocean. Near the famous Bikini Atoll, the U.S. military command gathered a group of 95 target ships. Instead of humans, they placed experimental animals on board. Goats, sheep, rats, and pigs were housed in cabins and scattered across the decks. Military equipment was installed on the ships, which were German trophies: Messerschmitts, Junkers, Tigers, and Panthers. The aim of the test was to study the impact of nuclear weapons on military vessels. On July 1st, the improvised flotilla was hit by the Able bomb. It exploded 150 meters higher than planned, and observers assessed that it caused much less damage than expected. On July 25th, the military carried out a second explosion, this time underwater. The Baker bomb detonated at a depth of 27 meters. As a result of the tests, 9 ships sustained critical damage. 3 destroyers sank, and all the large experimental animals perished. However, some managed to survive. The rats scattered across the ships and found shelter, and then they swam to the shore. Throughout the 1950s, the U.S. Army conducted another 67 atomic tests on Bikini Atoll. Once a thriving island, it became a radioactive testing ground. In 1963, scientists landed on Bikini and the nearby islands. They studied the flora and fauna after the nuclear bombings and were greatly surprised to find surviving animals. This tiny archipelago in the Pacific Ocean was once a paradise. But over 12 years of constant nuclear testing, the atoll and its surroundings turned into a lifeless wasteland. Even decades later, the dosimeter still beeps with concern, indicating elevated radiation levels. Only 3 years ago, sharks returned to the waters of Bikini Atoll and the Marshall Islands. This means the ocean is gradually recovering. Dale Koken has been monitoring the animal and plant life of the archipelago for 56 years. He first arrived at the former nuclear testing site in 1963. At that time, biologists from the University of the Environment in Ohio received permission to study the consequences of radiation contamination and landed on Eniwetok Atoll for the first time. Koken and his colleagues searched for surviving animals and insects, and a few days later they found the only inhabitants of the atoll. They were rats. They had gone underground. As you know, rats are animals that live deep down, so they had been living there under the buildings for a long time. Surprisingly, there was a vast number of rats on the radiation-contaminated atoll. The scientist had already noticed some changes back then. The rodent's fur was darker than usual, yet the rats were breeding as if nothing had happened, in conditions hazardous to their lives. It's unclear how they survived. The radiation level on the island exceeded the permissible limits by 20 times. The rats received massive doses of radiation, but this had no impact on their physiology or health. No mutations or even traces of radiation sickness were found by the biologists. Somehow the rats managed to adapt to conditions where any other organism would have been doomed. There's a joke that the last animal on Earth will be either a rat or a cockroach on a dead plant. I return to the point that these animals have a high level of adaptability, and now we know that an anti-radiation shelter can be placed underground where you won't be as exposed to radiation. According to the latest estimates, there are at least twice as many rats as humans. They learn very quickly and even manage to pass on knowledge to the next generations. What do you think about it? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your opinion is very important to me. Don't forget to give me a like if you liked it and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new episodes. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.